Good afternoon once again. Our session 4 is titled Asia Pacific Region Perspectives from India. The session would be chaired by Rear Admiral Raja Menon, Distinguished Fellow IPCS and NMF, and the speakers are Professor S.D. Muni, Distinguished Fellow IDSA, and Ambassador Leela Ponappa, the former Deputy NSA. Handing over to the chair now.
Thank you, Aditi. Ladies and gentlemen, we've now come to the last panel discussion of the day, and quite aptly, it's about India's options. I just wish, I like the fact that India's options has been left to the last, because it is necessary to have defined the scenario before we go into options. And that presumably is what we've been doing during the day. I just wish that we had had more time for discussions, because there were some big issues thrown up during the morning and afternoon sessions on which I don't think we attempted to try and get a consensus. But this is something that the speakers will have to deal with. For instance, is the US really a declining power? I mean, is China going to overtake it? Especially with its discovery of shale gas and oil and its regenerating employment and so on. Is the anti-access a success, or have the Americans given up on anti-access? So there are a lot of issues like this. Is the ASEAN going to stand firm, or is it going to unravel at the first sign of pressure? So there are many issues like this in which we have to choose India's option. And that, of course, assumes that India has options. Does it have options, or does it have only a single option? But to address all this, we've got two fine panelists. We've got Professor Muni, who has written and spoken about these subjects for very long. He's a very distinguished academic who has straddled the world of diplomacy too. And on my left we have Leela Ponappa, who's also had a very distinguished diplomatic career, followed by a stint in the National Security Council staff. So I don't think we could have asked for two better speakers on the subject. I think we've got slightly less than 20 minutes, around 18 minutes, so that we can stick to the schedule. And may I ask Professor Muni to take the rostrum?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nias. This is my first chance here, enjoying the place. And thanks for the kind of invitation which gives a real break from Delhi's maddening crowds. I have two parts presentation. One to portray the regional situation, then to look at the Indian response. The first part, as you said, quite exhaustively covered, and I shall not repeat the points which have been made, but some points I'd like to flag just to make my discussion easier. In the regional situation, India must keep an eye on three things. One is the hotspots, or hotspot is a bit hot word, areas of intense competition and rivalry. The second is the confused ASEAN. And the third is the surge for democracy, ethnic polarization, and nationalism in this region. I think it would be a cocktail of these three forces which would really decide what is going to unfold in this region. In terms of the hotspots, I'm using this word, not quite convinced of it, but just for the sake of convenience. Are three conflicts: US-China, China-Japan, and South China Sea. South China Sea, China-Japan, we have talked enough. On US-China, there are three possibilities, and I think all the three possibilities are and will remain on table. Possibility of G2, the two deciding their areas of influence and activity. Very intense Cold War, which I think we are already in. And third, a possibility of conflict. Speakers before me have quite competently underlined the constraints and the failures of pivot US pivot. But I believe, and I don't want to go through them all over again, but I believe that pivot would outlive Obama. Because to my mind, pivot actually is driven by the US desire to reassert its global leadership. It is only in the situation when US declines unhaltingly and China rises unstoppably, that maybe in 30 years we will reach 40 years or 50 years we will reach a situation where US pivot will have to be folded out of the region. Otherwise, who knows, if Hillary Clinton wins the next election, I have a feeling it would be reinforced, refurbished. So this is how the US would operate in this region. But certainly it would remain an active player. It is down at the moment, but not completely out. China, to my mind, has evolved a very nuanced strategy, which has two components. One is, of course, the reassertion of its own aspirations and ambitions as an emerging power. We have all talked about it, the territorial assertions, the ADIZ, show of muscle. Shrikant listed a long list of what China is doing or not doing. But at the same time, while doing that, China is also engaging with the whole region, including with the US. US has been trying to engage even China militarily, and my conversations with many of the American people underlined that for the last 2.5 years they have been trying to establish direct contacts with military with PLA. Did not succeed except for the last few months, when Xi has managed to sort out some of the equations between the party and the PLA. PLA had its own assertion earlier, and now they are having military-to-military context. Only about, I think, 4 weeks back maybe, Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, came up with a statement that they are very actively working on the Chinese proposed model of great power relations, which earlier the US had rejected. When Xi himself visited Washington, there was not much of a response to that proposal. And this is being worked out. And as Bhadran and others mentioned, there are various global commons and regional issues like North Korean nuclear question, where China is very happily working or prepared to work with the US. China is also breaching pivot. When I said this to some of the friends outside, they said pivot is already finished. I said it is down, not out. Therefore, they are working to breach pivot, and that is indicated in terms of the Chinese pressure on Japan and Philippines, also on Vietnam. The Chinese efforts to woo India and Indonesia with massive economic proposals, and so far as India is concerned, we can raise this question whether the apparent softness in China's attitude towards India is tactical or strategic, whether it is just for a short time or it is going to last. But certainly they have become much softer, much communicative, if not softer on border issues. They have promised 30% investment in India's infrastructure sector, which is a huge investment. I am told there is a nuclear dialogue on between India and China, at least for last 8 months. They have talked about the code of conduct on the border, fearing that what they have been doing, India is also capable of doing to them. And then there is a maritime security dialogue between India and China. They are much softer towards ASEAN now than they were about, say, 6 to 8 months back, and are willing. They already indicated, I think the negotiations are going to take place very soon, on the code of conduct, as to how they earlier were not coming on table there. And there are new proposals like the new maritime silk route or Silk Road, which actually is an effort to collectively engage the countries of the region, where China's trade and traffic is equally protected and free, because then it becomes a collective heritage or a collective proposition. Now I can't, yes. We have talked in the morning about China's vulnerability, which also make them be a little soft and flexible in their approach. On China, Japan, one of the reasons behind, and Keshavan went into details about what Abe thinks or what his compulsions are, is that the new generations, which are not very strong in demographic numbers, but they back a revision in China's defense posture and security doctrines. And that's why he's probably moved by this pressure from home. Of course, there is a lot of skepticism if US would be willing and able to defend Japan when chips are down. In South China Sea, as I said, China has made a tactical retreat in terms of negotiations, keeping them. They have said very clearly they would not compromise and concede on the territorial issues, but they are willing to talk on issues which they were not willing to talk earlier. First time when the Code of Conduct issue came, they said we will deal with it bilaterally, not in any collective manner. But unfortunately, ASEAN countries or South China Sea dispute involved countries have not been able to sort out even their own bilateral problems in South China Sea, which makes them very weak. And secondly, there is no consensus as to how to address this issue in relation to China. Every country has a different approach. And if that is the approach, then to my mind, it is a very, very confused ASEAN, which doesn't know what its security perspective is. In fact, I read a book written by a Thai scholar on ASEAN Way. And he said ASEAN Way is like a Thai way. And the Thai way is make compromise with the strongest power around. So the Thai always maintained their independence, all the time compromising with whosoever was strong there. And he said this is what ASEAN does. That in terms of stronger power, you make compromises, largely because of their own constraints in the situation where they have a burgeoning economic relationship with China and have strategic concerns with China. So when it comes to economic engagement, they continue to have it with China. When it comes to security questions, they want US to come in, they want India to come in, they want Japan to do something else. They want Indonesia to do something else, if at all it can do. Therefore, this is a problem which is there. And the third issue, as I said, is the democratic upsurge in Myanmar, Thailand, Singapore. A lot of instability where Buddhist and Muslim conflicts are there, and I think this is becoming a new breeding ground for the Islamic or jihadi extremists if it is not controlled. And the rise of nationalism, which is very clearly indicated both in relation to Japan and in relation to China. So that's what broadly the regional situation is. So what can India do? I think first of all we must take up this mentally, that Asia-Pacific area is or Indo-Pacific region is the region where India will have to be active. I told you, I still have that quotation of Nehru when he said that Atlantic would cease into its importance, Pacific would rise, and India must continue to play. Therefore, we must change our mindset that this is not an area where we have to be active. We have got to be active. Secondly, I think we should cash on the opportunities which are opened by the so-called hotspots. And I see very clear indications that India is being wooed in the region by Japan, by ASEAN. Even China doesn't want to alienate us. US wants to give us a linchpin status with all the ifs and buts, even which I raised. But this opens up certain opportunities, and we must try and catch them both economically and strategically as much as we can. And I think we are building up, including, Andaman and Nicobar capabilities which are being built, is a good sign. Secondly, we must keep ASEAN as an anchor for our diplomacy in the region, but with constraints, as I mentioned to you, that ASEAN cannot be a totally reliable. ASEAN is a good facade, put it this way. India doesn't want to come in the front, US doesn't want to come in the front so far as China is concerned. So when it comes to diplomatic and political engagements, ASEAN is a good facade, but ASEAN is a weak and a slippery instrument in terms of promoting interests. India must also try and firm up its own security understanding in Bay of Bengal area. We have struck a very fine agreement trilaterally with, say, India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. I think possibilities should be explored if this can be extended or an entirely a new agreement with countries like Myanmar and Thailand and Bangladesh involving, again, within the Bay of Bengal. And also a little downwards with Indonesia and Malaysia. Singapore, we already have a very, very close defense relationship. There are other forums, strategic fora, which India has created, like India-Korea-Japan, India-US-Japan, India-US-Japan, Australia, where Australia was hesitant so far, but is now willing to come. Most of the issues on agenda are disaster relief and this and that, but it's good to continue to talk strategic issues there. Maybe something concrete comes out, maybe something does not come out. We must also continue constructive engagement with China and some of its initiatives. In fact, this is going to be a major challenge. The other day there was a proposal of the China Silk Road, and there was very strong, I think some of the former foreign secretaries wrote articles saying that we must have nothing to do with it. This is a kind of a trap, we should not get into this. My feeling is that the proposal of Maritime Silk Road actually was an Indian proposal in the sense that we worked on it for centuries before the Mughals and the British came. The spice trade and all that, the whole civilizational, cultural route, this is what it was. And why should we not try and explore if we can join and again become far more active? I mean, we are trying to be active. So why one should shy away from it only because the proposal has come from the Chinese? You know, we had a lot of hesitation on the Kunming initiative to join for a long time. Bangladesh, China, India, and Myanmar, these 4 countries. The Chinese have now come and offered to build roads in Myanmar and Bangladesh, linking them up in terms of connectivity. And we were resisting it for a long time, except for last 6 months to 1 year. We have said, okay, we are willing to join and let us have. Therefore, some of these proposals which are coming from China must be looked at as constructively as possible, and if we can engage ourselves with them without hurting, harming India's strategic interest, one should go ahead with them. Lastly, we must also engage with the socio-economic issues. The question of democracy is going to be very critical in this region. India has its own experiences. It has all kind of pluses and minuses so far as its own democratic functioning is concerned. But everybody recognizes that India is a very stable democracy, no matter how the governments come and go, how imperfect it is. But it is a very strong democracy. And I think in countries like Thailand, in countries like Myanmar, this question would come up, and we must very creatively see and facilitate the forces which are secular and which are democratic. And lastly, after Ukraine, Russia is a very promising ally even in the Asia-Pacific region, and as far as possible, we must try and warm up that relationship. Thank you very much.
That's my favorite speaker. I think Professor Muni has done extremely well in the first part, summarizing the scenarios and then laying out India's options, which I think is the way to go.